13-year-old Rachel Mellon Skemp was an average middle school girl. She loved music, playing with her friends, and attending church. In January of 1996, on an unforgivingly cold Illinois winter day, Rachel would stay home from school, complaining of a sore throat. Her mother would go to work, and her step-siblings to school. Her stepfather Vince would remain home. In the mid-afternoon, after Rachel had gone to lay down for a nap, he would leave the house to take the family dog for a short walk. Vince would lose control and sight of the dog, eventually returning home after doing some searching for him. It would soon be discovered, however, that the dog was not the only member of the family that was missing. This is Midwest Mystery Files, Episode 37, The Disappearance of Rachel Mellon Skemp. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midwest Mystery Files. I'm your host, Jeremiah, with just a few quick things before we start. Midwest Mystery Files is a true crime podcast focused on missing and murdered cases within the Midwestern region of the United States. I can be found on all major podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube with delayed episodes. Social media and contact info will be listed at the end of the episode. If you wish to support the podcast and help fund article and record searches, as well as get early access to episodes and bonus episodes, I encourage you to check out my Patreon at www.patreon.com/Midwest Mystery Files. I would also like to take this moment to thank my amazing patrons, Laura and Todd. And without any further delay, let's get into today's episode. Just to the southwest of Chicago, Illinois, set on Interstate 55 and historic Route 66, lies the community of Bolingbrook. To most connoisseurs of true crime, the suburb of 74,000 people is recognized as the home of Drew Peterson, the former police officer who was convicted in 2012 for the 2004 murder of his ex-wife, Kathleen Savio, and who is suspected in the 2007 disappearance of his then-wife, Stacy Peterson. Older than these tragedies, though, lies another unsolved disappearance, one that has left investigators, family, friends, and the community at large wondering for 28 years what happened to a 13-year-old girl on a frigid day in January of 1996. Rachel Marie Mellon Skemp was born October 13, 1982, in Melrose, Illinois, to Jeff and Amy Skemp. The couple would divorce in 1985, when Rachel was 3 years old. At this juncture, Jeff Skemp would move to Texas, while Amy and Rachel would reside in Bolingbrook, Illinois. It was at this time that Amy would also begin a relationship with a man by the name of Vincent Mellon. Soon, Vince, Amy, and Rachel would all move in together, and the couple would marry. They would then bring Rachel two half-siblings, a brother in 1988 and a sister in 1990. The family would reside at 612 Melissa Drive in Bolingbrook. Rachel has been described by friends and family as being a goofy, bubbly, and creative girl who liked to write short stories. She loved animals, science, nature, recycling, and Alanis Morissette. Many of her friends remember her as the life of the party, and always the most beautiful girl in the room. She was also quite active in the church. Her pastor, Reverend Frank Peoples, would tell the Maywood Herald in 1997, quote, "Rachel was one of the brightest and sweetest kids you wanted to meet. She was a young lady with a great deal of promise, and very mature for her age, in the sense of being comfortable with everyone." Despite her happy and loving demeanor, there were early signs of a somewhat turbulent home life. According to reports, in 1990, Amy and Vince Mellon got in a fight that ended with Amy filing a restraining order against Vincent for hitting her, pushing her down the stairs, and making verbal threats against Rachel. Over the next several weeks, however, the restraining order was eventually dropped, and Amy and Vincent would get back together. In 1995, at age 12, Rachel briefly ran away from home, explaining in a note that she left it was because one of her younger siblings had broken something and she feared she was going to be blamed for it. Reportedly, she ended up staying outside of a friend's house before calling Vince's parents and explaining the situation. They then picked her up and took her home. This brings us to January of 1996. At this time, Rachel was 13 years old and attending 7th grade at B.J. Ward Middle School, where she was an A student and had a close-knit group of friends, including Carrie Johnson, who, to this day, has acted as a main advocate in Rachel's case. In 2016, while talking to Cold Case Files Chicago, Carrie would describe Rachel as an old soul and a fan of the Beatles, who would join her family on weekend camping trips. Carrie would also tell The Sun that on January 30th, 1996, Rachel had attended school but appeared visibly upset and was unusually quiet. Later, she would be seen crying in one of her classes. Carrie would state that at the end of the day, she met up with Rachel to ask her what was wrong, to which Rachel responded, quote, "Don't worry about it. It's my problem. I'll deal with it." The next day, January 31st, was a bitterly cold day, with a base temp hardly getting past 0 and wind chills hitting at negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Rachel woke up that day complaining of a sore throat and opted to stay home. The only other person in the home that day was Vince Mellon, who wasn't unemployed at the time. According to Lucy Skemp, Rachel's paternal grandmother, who lived in Texas, she received a call from Rachel at approximately 10:45 a.m. after Rachel had received a letter from Lucy in the mail. According to Lucy, the call lasted about 4 to 5 minutes, and towards the end, Rachel got very quiet, which, when this happened, Lucy asked Rachel, quote, "Is he there?" with Rachel saying yes, after which Rachel ended the call. But overall, Lucy would state that everything seemed normal about the call. He, in this situation, is most likely Vince. Some reports state that Rachel was not allowed to call her grandparents, but I could never really nail down a reason why. Lucy would be the only other person, besides Vince Mellon, to speak with Rachel that day. According to Vince, he and Rachel spent the late morning and early afternoon playing video games until Rachel went to take a nap in her bedroom at 2:00 p.m. Around 2:30 p.m., Vince decided to take the family dog, a German Shepherd named Duke, for a walk, even though it was negative 20 degrees outside with the wind chill. Vince would state that while on the walk, Duke took note of a rabbit and gave chase, causing Vince to lose his grip on the leash. Vince then searched for Duke for a short bit before returning home at approximately 3 p.m. Duke would be returned home by a real estate appraiser who, according to Amy Mellon, was at the house to take measurements as they were looking to potentially sell the home. It would soon be discovered, though, that Duke was not the only one missing from the household. According to Vince, he never checked on Rachel when he returned home, but Rachel's 6-year-old sister, Ashley, would return home from school at 3:15 p.m. and noticed Rachel was not in her room. Reportedly, she told Vince that Rachel was not there, but it wasn't until Amy Mellon returned home at 5:00 p.m. and was told her daughter wasn't there that police were called. When asked during a 1996 interview with WGN, Vince would state that he did not do any sort of search for Rachel once initially realizing she was gone. Reportedly, police, who were aware of Rachel's first attempt to run away, took over an hour to arrive and first told Amy that a report could not be filed for 24 hours, something that would become a point of contention between police and members of the family. Especially since signs were there right away that Rachel had not likely run off on her own. Rachel's coat, shoes, and boots all remained in the home. The only thing missing were a blue blanket that Rachel had been curled up in and 2 pillows. Some reports also note her slippers being gone. It was also noted at the time by police that Vince had noticeable scratches on his arm, to which he told police officers were from working on a vehicle in his garage. Almost immediately after Rachel's friend Carrie heard Rachel was missing, her and other friends began searching the area immediately, not allowing the cold to slow them down. Soon, a police report would be filed, and searches would intensify. Jeff Skemp would come in from Texas to search for his daughter. Relatives and neighbors handed out over 6,000 flyers to homes, churches, and businesses, and younger kids and teens searched parks and fields. Authorities performed searches of the ground, air, and water using geothermal imaging and drones. Even homes of members of the Skemp family in Texas and Mississippi were checked, but it was to no avail. There was no sign of Rachel Mellon Skemp. When asked about Rachel's disappearance, Amy Mellon would tell the Chicago Sun-Times on February 4th, 1996, quote, "It's devastating, just not hearing anything. Nights are the hardest part for me. I've been getting about 4 hours of sleep a night. I'm hoping that she's staying somewhere, that she's with someone, safe and sound." Bolingbrook Deputy Police Chief Michael Calgano would tell the Daily Herald in the same article that police were investigating as if Rachel was kidnapped, but would state that, quote, "We just don't know if she is a kidnapping victim or a runaway." In a February 17th article, Calgano would note that police had received, quote, "numerous calls from people saying they've seen her, but unfortunately none of them have panned out." There was also still no clear sign of whether she had run away or been abducted. It's at this point that coverage on this case dies out a bit, at least from the available resources I have, but a few things of note that would happen over the next few months include: in February of 1996, Amy and Vince Mellon would hire Cynthia Jorgantis, a private detective from Lockport, Illinois, to assist in finding Rachel. By the end of the year, she would be working for Jeff Skemp, Rachel's father, instead. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, as well as the FBI, would get involved around this time as well. On July 8th, 1996, Amy Mellon would appear alongside a psychic on The Jerry Springer Show. The supposed psychic, who specialized in missing kids, would claim that Rachel was dead. I tried to find a clip, or at least a soundbite, from this episode, but was unsuccessful. As the year would move on, family would confer with more psychics, and police would continue to follow leads. The warm summer would move into a cool fall, and while the Midwestern leaves began to change and fall, one thing would remain painfully the same. There was still no sign of Rachel. October would see her 14th birthday come and go, but instead of cake and presents, there was only the hope that she would soon be found. Around December, Jeff Skemp, Rachel's father, would decide he had enough of being too far away and would move from Texas to Chicago to, quote, "shake things up" in the search for Rachel and find out exactly what happened to her. While speaking to the Chicago Sun-Times on December 18th, 1996, upon being asked about Rachel and her whereabouts, he would state, quote, "I feel she is dead and was murdered. I can accept that. The hell I live through every day is not knowing what happened. I don't think I could go on for the rest of my life not knowing what happened to Rachel. I know she didn't run away. There would have been some sign of her by now if she'd run away." In January of 1997, Amy Mellon would start to make her own waves. According to an article in The Sun from January 10th, It would be reported that Amy was no longer speaking with investigators in Rachel's case because they were convinced that her husband, and Rachel's stepfather, Vince Mellon, was responsible for Rachel's disappearance. Amy would state, quote, "I found out they made up their minds that Vince is a suspect, and that's that." She would go on to state that police did a lackluster job checking the home, noting that they did not check for prints and they did not check the sheets and pillows from Rachel's bed, but did take the sheets from Amy and Vince's bed. They also took the clothes that Vince was wearing that day. She would state that other things were taken from Rachel's room, however. Police would reportedly tell Amy they did not take prints because there was no sign of forced entry, which I do want to reiterate, the door was unlocked, according to Vince. The article would go on to report that a steak knife and a book titled Daddy's Kiss, about a father who sexually molests his daughter, were found under the bed. I did my best to track down this particular book online for further context, but was unable to find so much as a book cover for it. The only thing with a similar title is an obvious kids' book of a much more innocent nature. Amy would go on to tell the Sun that she was unaware of either the book or the knife being under Rachel's bed, but would state that Rachel liked to hide things she didn't want Amy to find. She would go on to state that Rachel would sometimes eat oranges in bed, and it was possible that that was what the knife was for. She would have little to say about the book, except that once police found it, they instantly concluded that there was a case of incest and that Vince Mellon was sexually assaulting Rachel. At that juncture, Vince was reportedly questioned for more than 3 hours. He was allegedly asked repeatedly what he did with the body. Amy would state that police believed Vince drove the body somewhere. There was the car in the garage that Vince had stated he'd been working on when asked by police about the scratches on his arm. To this, Amy would explain that the car was started that day, but never left the garage. There was also snow in the driveway with no tire marks, and the tags and license plate were expired, and Vince did not have a license. In her continued defense of her husband, she would state, quote, "Why is he going to take a chance of driving a car with no current sticker on it and license? I told the police. Come on. Vince is not that stupid. The car has not moved. There was still snow on the ground." She would go on to explain that the driveway was wet, and that if Vince had gone to a muddy place or had driven a car, there would be a wet spot behind the car, but it was dry. Police would also reportedly accuse Vince of having an accomplice help move the body. This would result in a friend of Vince's, as well as Vince's sister's boyfriend, taking polygraphs, which they passed. Amy and Vince were also given polygraph tests, which were inconclusive. Police requested they take the tests again, but the Mellons refused. Amy would tell the Sun, quote, "I said, polygraph test or blood test, we don't want to do any more of that stuff." Amy would finish out by explaining that Rachel did not seem unhappy and her grades were good. She was even an honor student. Thus, there was no way Vince was sexually assaulting her. If he was, then Rachel would have never stayed home with him and would have gone to school. Because of the allegations, the Mellons had moved 8 miles south to Lockport, citing that they were constantly being harassed by individuals in the neighborhood. Lastly, Amy would state that she was following her own leads, which included a claim that a security guard for an upscale Indiana neighborhood had seen Rachel alive, although she would not disclose how she found this information. In a January 31st article, it would be revealed that Jeff Skemp had received 2 letters in the mail, demanding he return his daughter and threatening his life if he didn't. The letters came while Jeff was still living in Dallas, Texas. The first one, postmarked from Dallas, arrived 6 months earlier. It contained the message, typed in small letters, quote, "Return Rachel right away, or if you don't, I won't be responsible for what happens to you." The second letter, postmarked from San Antonio, Texas, 250 miles away from Dallas, arrived 2 months earlier and contained a message similar to the first one, but was spelled out using letters clipped from a magazine. Ken Skemp, Jeff Skemp's father, stated that he believed the letters were being sent by an unnamed Chicago TV reporter who had repeatedly called looking for interviews and attempting to stir up more of a story than what was there. The letters would be turned over to the FBI, but both the FBI and Bolingbrook police would decline to speak on the matter. Most of the rest of 1997 would be quiet for Rachel's case until September. On September 3rd, Jeff Skemp would receive a letter from an anonymous, self-proclaimed psychic. The letter was postmarked from a post office in Oak Park, located 25 miles northeast of Bolingbrook. The letter, which was written in a green marker on a store-bought sympathy card, read, quote, "I keep receiving a vision of a shoe now burned, within walking distance of a park or place where she liked to go meet people her own age. Her friends. I think it is, or was buried there. The police investigation is not going rightly now, but the prevailing feeling they have is correct. Your daughter is very happy, praising God and Him in heaven. I know earthly passing is difficult to take, but no, she is exquisitely happy." Jeff would admit that he didn't believe the letter had much merit to it. It was just another letter from another psychic. He did, however, express frustration because the letter had originally been mailed to the Bolingbrook Police Department, who never opened it. Reportedly, this was because Jeff's phone was temporarily disconnected, and the Bolingbrook police did not know where he lived in nearby Maywood. They eventually resorted to contacting Jeff's parents in Texas to get his address. Frustrated, Jeff, who believed it should not have been that hard to locate him, would tell The Sun on September 10th, 1997, quote, "This is kind of indicative of how feet have been dragged. That card turned out to be nothing. But what if it had been something?" Police did indeed track down the author of the letter, whom they claimed was a woman with a history of mental disorders, and the information she provided was false. Despite his frustration with the police, Jeff would acknowledge they were still his best chance to find out what happened to Rachel, stating, quote, "Even if we don't like the way things are done, they are the only tools we have." Things would stay fairly quiet for the next couple of years, at least in the public eye, until the end of January of 2000. At that time, it would be revealed to the media by Bolingbrook investigators that a grand jury had been hearing testimony in Rachel's case for almost 2 months. Bolingbrook Police Commander Keith George would tell the media that police believed that the probability existed that foul play occurred in Rachel's disappearance. He would continue on, stating that there had recently been significant developments in that investigation, citing new evidence, new information, technical advances, and renewed efforts to delve into evidence initially recovered at the scene. Amy Mellon would tell the Daily Herald on January 28th that she knew nothing about the grand jury and would state her belief that Rachel did not meet with foul play. She would state, quote, "I have new evidence myself, but I'm not going to disclose it. I can tell you this much. It's someone we know that gave us this information. They think it's foul play, but they didn't think that last time." The last statement is interesting to me since she insisted in earlier interviews that her husband and Rachel's stepfather, Vince Mellon, was being targeted as a prime suspect. It's worth noting that there had apparently been 2 other attempted grand juries to which Amy would state that she showed up for but was told when she arrived that the hearings were canceled. Bolingbrook police, however, would state that she refused to testify. For the 2000 grand jury, Amy and Vince were both subpoenaed to testify. The two were reportedly also questioned by police for several hours on January 28, 2000. Amy was reportedly held and questioned in the conference room of her place of employment, while Vince was taken to the Bolingbrook police station and questioned, as well as was presented with a warrant to submit blood, saliva, and hair. Vince and Amy would be questioned by the grand jury on February 2nd. Amy was questioned for several hours, reportedly answering all questions presented to her. Vince was only with the jury for approximately 5 minutes. He did not answer any questions and instead invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The couple would leave the courthouse immediately without talking to reporters. Reportedly, 4 other people testified that day, all relatives of the Mellons. The Mellons would follow up their testimony with a press conference on February 4th to, quote, set the record straight. Amy would state that police were looking to blame Vince so they could cover up the embarrassment of their failure to solve the case. She would state, quote, the police have asked me to buy into their theories and speculation, but I cannot believe it. I know my daughter, and I know my husband. Amy would also claim her own continued investigation in her search for Rachel. She would state that she had hired a private investigator and performed stakeouts in other states, and searched the internet for countless hours. She would also claim that 1,000 people had claimed to have seen Rachel in the 4 years since she disappeared. Amy's attorney, John Schrock, would state that Amy had not handed any of her findings over to the police because they remained suspicious of Vince. He would say to the crowd, quote, there's nothing to hide, but if you tell me where we're leading and it doesn't hold up, we'll look foolish. On February 9th, Jeff Skemp would speak to the Chicago Sun-Times and inform the public that it had been revealed to him that police had Rachel's diary, which contained a passage alluding to a suspect in her disappearance. Jeff was brought in to confirm that the handwriting belonged to Rachel. He would tell the Sun, quote, I said not only was it her handwriting, but that I could tell by the wording that it was her doing the writing. All right, and I'm going to give a quick trigger warning for assault against a child for the next couple lines. So just jump ahead a couple seconds if that's not something you want to hear. Initially, it was only revealed that the journal entry was about a man, quote, who wanted to sexually molest her. It would be revealed shortly after that the man in question was Vince Mellon. I'm going to keep this as quick and simple as I can, but again, quick trigger warning. In short, the entry was from 1995, where Rachel alleges that Vince came into her room, instructed her to remove his shirt, and then he did the same. He then proceeded to kiss her. Rachel would write that Vince explained he was doing this to teach her to be aware of sexual predators and what they may do if she met one. Jeff Skemp would testify to this information and answer questions put forth by the grand jury on February 16th. In the midst of all this, Amy Mellon would sue the Bolingbrook police to recover items she believed were taken in an illegal search of her and Vince's home in Joliet while they were being questioned on January 28, 2000. Amy would state that after she was done being detained and questioned at her place of employment, she returned home, and as she would state in the lawsuit, quote, I discovered that someone had been through my underwear drawer, and that someone may have been through my closet. This would further be supported by an affidavit filed by a neighbor. The neighbor wrote, quote, the officer told me they were taking Vince Mellon away for questioning, that they were securing the house and putting the dogs away. He would then state that after talking to the officers, he saw police, quote, remove from the Mellon residence a stuffed black duffel bag and a cardboard box with several manila envelopes. In the February 19th Herald News article, aptly titled, Is Rachel Still Alive? Girl's Fate Gets Lost in Squabbling, Amy would reveal that a private investigator allegedly found an illegal wiretap on her phone after officers searched the house. Bolingbrook police would deny any illegal phone taps. maintaining the same quietness they, along with the FBI, had done since the lawsuit began. The suit does draw out for several months until it's dismissed by a judge in May of 2000. I don't want to dive too deep into it because it's a lot of back and forth and conjecture, but it was still a major event during the investigation into Rachel's disappearance, so I will hit on the key points real quick. A Joliet policeman would come forward and state that he saw a plainclothes policeman enter the Mellon residence when the neighbor did, and describe them as leaving with the black duffel bag and manila envelopes that the neighbor had described. The police would be accused of entering the home under false pretenses, alleging that they were putting the Mellons' dogs away at Vince's request, something that was stated in an affidavit submitted by Bolingbrook Police Commander Keith George. Lawyers argued, however, Vince was leaving in his truck when stopped, with no reason for the dogs to be checked on. Commander George would further state in the affidavit that after the dogs were secured, his officers left the house without taking anything and did not re-enter the house, despite both the neighbor and Joliet policeman saying otherwise. Amy would eventually find that photos were missing out of photo albums after the photos allegedly ended up in the hand of the FBI, who took them to Amy's native home of the Philippines and proceeded to interview her sister. Here's where things get confusing, mostly due to things being hushed under a court order, but it would be revealed that a, quote, new secret police technique was used in the investigation. Whether this was used inside the house or not is unclear. The judge overseeing the civil suit ruled that Commander George had to answer questions from Amy Mellon's attorney, John Schrock. However, they would not be able to discuss the conversation with anyone, including Schrock's client, Amy Mellon. A final deposition would be held in May of 2000, where the case would be dismissed after John Schrock got his answers and determined that Amy and Vince's constitutional rights were not violated. Through the civil suit and the grand jury, whatever police thought they had in terms of evidence and interviews must not have been enough, as the grand jury investigation ended with no indictments or arrests. Rachel's case would go quiet again for several months, until March 13th of 2001, when the Mellons would receive 3 phone calls in 3 minutes. Joliet police would tell the Herald News that Amy reported the 3 calls to them. The first call, which was answered by Vince, was met with silence on the other end. The second call was answered by Amy, who was again met by silence, but reportedly told the caller, quote, "Rachel, if this is you, we miss you, and we want you to come home." The line went dead once again. The Mellons' 11-year-old daughter answered the third call. This time, a voice on the other end asked for Amy. The phone was passed to Amy, and in a sobbing voice asked, quote, "Is this Amy?" Amy asked if the caller was Rachel, to which the caller simply stated, quote, "I'm in your backyard," and instructed Amy to look out the window. Amy told police. She then asked what state the caller was in, and the caller abruptly hung up. Amy also told police that she had received numerous silent phone calls before from both Canada and the United States, but this was the only time someone on the other end had spoken. For the next several years after this, there would be little movement in Rachel's case. In an article on the anniversary of Rachel's disappearance in January of 2002, the Daily Herald would get a rare quote from Vince Mellon on the case, as from what I could find, he had done little in interviews other than a few early news articles and a news broadcast in 1996. He would simply state, quote, "The basic line is, we have a missing daughter. They went out of their way to get me, and we still have no promising leads." The only other quote from the article from Vince is, quote, "Everybody's out to get me." In July of 2003, Amy had Vince arrested for slapping their son during a drunken altercation. In November of 2004, Vince and Amy were both arrested after police were alerted about a family fight. Reportedly, the two and their son were all involved in some sort of physical altercation. Vince was arrested on a charge of domestic battery and 3 warrants for failing to appear in court. Amy was arrested on an unspecified warrant. On January 28, 2006, just shy of 10 years since Rachel disappeared, Jeff Skemp held a memorial service for Rachel. In an article from the Forest Leaves in Forest City, Illinois, announcing the memorial, Jeff would state that while he still hoped that one day he could find what happened to Rachel, saying he even kept his number listed so she could call, he had long accepted that she was most likely not coming home. He would tell the Forest Leaves, quote, "I've accepted it won't happen. I dream about that day all the time. I struggled with the idea of a memorial service for several months. I know it'll bring the TV people out and I'll have to face my emotions, but it needs to be done. Rachel deserves a memorial service, and her family and friends need to grieve." In the same article, Bolingbrook Police Lieutenant Tom Ross would be quoted as saying that Rachel's case was still active, stating, quote, "It's a missing persons case in which we suspect foul play. It's been investigated as a homicide. It would be very difficult for a child to completely vanish. It just doesn't happen. There are people of interest in the case. Over time, some people have been excluded, while others remain people of interest. There are no new suspects." The service would be attended by approximately 100 people, including Jeff, other members of the Skemp family, Rachel's friends, and community members, both known and unknown to Rachel. Shortly after the memorial, a local citizen would put up a $30,000 reward for information leading to a resolution in Rachel's case. But unfortunately, to this day, not much more is known than what was at the time. Despite this, Jeff has done his best to keep the case alive, including an appearance with private investigator Cindy Drogantis on Nancy Grace in 2011, and an appearance on Case Files Chicago in 2016. For this, he was joined by Rachel's childhood best friend, Carrie Johnson. The last updates in the media came in 2021, as the 25th anniversary of Rachel's tragic disappearance was approaching. Police would tell the media in a written statement that her case was still active, and the evidence was preserved to be checked again when further technological advances happen. WGN Chicago would post a letter from a former lead investigator on the case, Terry Riley Kearse. The letter reads as follows. To Rachel's killer. By all accounts, Rachel was a great big sister, well regarded in her large circle of friends, an excellent student, and most of all, a funny, kind, and loving girl. At 13, she had her whole life ahead of her, full of tremendous possibilities. In 1 second, you stole her hopes, her dreams, and her life. For almost 25 years, you have lived a nightmare. Rachel is with you day and night. Her memory and your deed have destroyed your life. Death is imminent, and you fear meeting your Maker with this horrible sin hanging over your head. You have no peace on earth, and you fear you will have no peace after death. There is only one thing to do. Confess and help the police bring Rachel home. Give Rachel the Christian burial she deserves. Give her loved ones closure. Give yourself the peace that your soul has been searching for. A few years prior, in 2016, Kearse had told the Naperville Sun that she considered not solving Rachel's case one of her career's biggest failures. Speaking with ABC7 in Chicago in 2021, Jeff Skemp would state that his daughter only lived in his heart now, saying, quote, "I know she's in a better place, and she's not suffering." He would also go on, without mentioning names, to give a bit more blunt statement on what he thought happened to Rachel. He would state, quote, "Whoever did this, and I have my suspicions about what happened, did a really good job of covering up. and that's the problem. He would expand on this after stating that he couldn't blame police, but he believed they missed their prime opportunity. Quote, I think that if the police searched the garage the night that they first got called there, especially knowing how many times they've been called to that house, if they searched the garage and opened up the trunk of that car that didn't run, I bet they find her right then and there. Jeff Skemp still lives in the Chicagoland area. Vince and Amy Mellon have reportedly relocated to Tennessee and have resided there for several years. Attempts by press over the years to contact them have been unsuccessful. This is the part where I usually give a little speech about the passage of time, which it has been 28 years since Rachel disappeared. As I type this today, October 13th, Rachel Mellon Skemp should be celebrating her 42nd birthday. After the initial speech, I tend to hop into possible theories. But here's the thing. In the past, even when I have a pretty solid belief as to what I think happened, I never flat out say it. Because at the end of the day, I don't know. Even in cases such as Hang Lee or Caleb Berg, where it seems like we can all see the obvious answers, I've stayed objective, laid out the possibilities, and explained why I thought each one could work and couldn't work. I do this for two reasons. The main one being the case of Isabel Celis, a 6-year-old girl who was abducted from her room and murdered. In Isabel's case, so many people in the true crime sphere, including many podcasters, straight up accused her father due to his calm demeanor when calling 911. It ultimately ended up being a very rare home stranger abduction. It wasn't until the culprit was arrested in another murder that he led them to Isabel. A lesson was taught to the true crime community at large that day. The other reason is, as I stated before, no matter how obvious something is, we truly don't know until it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So I try to remain objective. I cannot remain objective here. As much as I try, there's just too much, in my opinion, that points to one answer. And in the name of professionalism, holding on to ethics, and frankly, avoiding legal issues, I still won't name names. But I'm pretty sure we're all on the same wavelength, and it doesn't need to be said anyway. What I will say, though, is that 28 years ago, an extremely smart, likable, joyful, and loving girl, a daughter, a friend, a sister, and a granddaughter, disappeared without a trace from this world. I do believe there were missteps in the beginning. While it's easy to say what I would have done as a cop, I truly don't think there was any reason that 24 hours should have passed before a 13-year-old girl could be reported missing, regardless of if she had run away before or not. She was a child, it was negative 20 degrees outside, and anything that could have protected her from the elements was left inside. Right off the bat, anyone should have been able to tell something was up. And it shouldn't have been left up to a handful of middle schoolers to go search for their friend in the blistering cold temperatures. That being said, it is apparent that investigators were bound and determined after the fact to find out what happened. It's just unfortunate that whatever evidence they had to bring in front of the grand jury wasn't what they needed to seal an indictment. 28 years is a long time to go without answers, especially when it may seem that the answer is right there. But Jeff Skemp and friends like Carrie are clearly holding strong. And even if they may feel like they'll never see Rachel again, they continue to hold on to the hope that one day they'll have answers. As I said before, Rachel should be celebrating her 42nd birthday right now as I type this. Celebrating with friends, family, and whoever she may have been chosen to surround herself with. Instead, someone thought it was their right to take her from this world. The girl who loved the Beatles and Alanis Morissette. The goofy girl who camped with Carrie and whose aunt taught her French. The girl who found a community in the church. A community that adored her. I want to finish off with a quote from Jeff Skemp, found in the memorial announcement from Forest Leaves in 2006. Quote, "The main thing I remember about her is her positive spirit. No matter what, in everything she did, she wanted everyone else to be happy. I remember picking her up one weekend, and we got stuck in traffic. She could sense my irritation. She said, 'Don't worry, Dad. It's just more time that we get to play the alphabet game, or more time to sing cab songs.'" When last seen, Rachel Marie Mellon Skemp was described as an Asian female with black hair and hazel eyes, standing 5 foot tall and 62 to 80 pounds. Rachel has a mole on the upper left side of her lip, and her ears are pierced. When first reported missing, she was listed only as Rachel Mellon, but that has since changed to add Skemp on the end, depending on the agency. She may appear to be of Italian or Greek descent. Rachel's hair was cut short at the time of her disappearance, but she often wore it shoulder length. She was 13 years old at the time of her disappearance and was last seen by her stepfather at their home located at 612 Melissa Drive in Bolingbrook, Illinois. She was wearing a pink sweater or sweatshirt, yellow sweatpants, and red house slippers. The blue blanket she was wrapped in and her 2 pillows were also missing. She took no winter clothes with her, and her bank account that she had access to has never been touched. If alive today, Rachel Mellon Skemp would be 42 years old. If you have any information on the disappearance of Rachel Mellon Skemp, please contact the Bolingbrook Police Department at 630-226-0600. If you're looking for any additional information, the Chicago Tribune has articles archived on their website. Otherwise, the Naperville Sun, the Daily Herald, the Chicago Sun-Times, and the Bolingbrook Sun provided a bulk of my information. There is also a decent amount of coverage from online articles and blogs. You can also check out and follow Help Find Rachel Marie Mellon Skemp on Facebook, a page ran by people close to Rachel, although it has not been updated for a while. Lastly, there was a website named rachelfind.com that the family had set up with photos and information on Rachel. The website appears to have been sold or stolen, but there is also a YouTube channel with the same name that I will link below, featuring several videos of Rachel. If you wish to let me know what you think happened, have case suggestions or comments, or just want to follow me and the show on social media, I can be found on Instagram at Midwest Mystery Files, X at Files Midwest, and on Facebook by searching for Midwest Mystery Files. You can also email me at midwestmysteryfilespod@gmail.com. I also post photos and sometimes links relevant to each case on social media, mainly on Facebook and Instagram. Lastly, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Good Pods, please feel free to rate and review the show. This helps make the show more visible in searches, and more importantly, helps bring attention to the cases I cover. Thank you to all who have done so already. Take care, everyone, and I will see you all next time.